In 1961, President Kennedy called on all Americans to rise to the challenges of the day. He knew that success depended upon the unity of efforts throughout the federal government and the nation. In a memorandum he wrote, "I want coordination of government activities outside of Washington significantly strengthened across departments and agency lines." From this, federal executive boards were born. The Greater Boston Federal Executive Board, one of 28 across the country, fosters communication, coordination, and collaboration with federal, state, and local government agencies. It is our hope that through this series, folks will learn about the mission and work done by different agencies, what that means for our country, and more specifically, what that means to each of us as individuals. This is your federal government, and I am your host, Diane LeBlanc. Hello everyone. Today we are featuring the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security, known to many as FEMA. Recently, FEMA has faced several challenges right here in New England.
The following is a presentation of FEMA Region 1.
As the storm came, trees falling on power lines down.
Within an hour and a half, 2 hours, I had 18 inches of water coming through my front yard and under my home.
And we could hear something that sounded like a railroad train coming through.
And large chunks of lumber and things falling from the sky, and it was busting the branches down of the trees, and it just snapped the trees like twigs.
I crawled out of the window and just looked at the devastation, and I could hear my neighbors calling for each other.
It was actually quite scary, not knowing what was going to happen next.
The cooperation is just phenomenal in terms of what you people have done through FEMA.
The tornado hit on June 1st. It was very intense and a lot of destruction.
We got a call from the State Emergency Management Director asking for what's called an Incident Management Assistance Team to deploy, and that was actually the night of the tornado. The storm was probably going through for a few hours when we had folks on the ground.
I think that our response was extraordinary. I think that all of the elected officials and people that we served, both in local and state agencies as well as the public at large, were very happy with what FEMA was able to bring to bear. Well, it's important for us as the Federal Emergency Management Agency to be out in the field, to get real situational awareness, to be shoulder to shoulder with our state and local counterparts.
And we have people from all over the country. There are 10 FEMA regions in the country. We have workers from 8 out of 10 regions.
We have extraordinary people here.
We've had floods, we've had tornadoes, we've had tropical storms. Our message has always been, and will continue to be prepared.
I am very grateful to have the regional leadership from this agency with us today. Mr. Don Boyce, who is the regional administrator, and Mr. Paul Ford, who is the deputy regional administrator. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Don, you are the regional head. Whenever disaster strikes, tornado, hurricane, flooding, we quickly hear people talking about FEMA. So talk to us a little bit about your basic mission and the role that you and your employees play when disaster hits the American citizenry?
Sure, be happy to. I think the most important thing is that we're part of a team. And as such, FEMA takes the coordinating role most often for the partner agencies, the 27 federal partner agencies that we have that respond in to the bunker when we activate the federal response in support of state and local communities. And I think that what FEMA's role really is to work with state and local partners as well as our federal counterparts to work on prevention and mitigation and preparedness and response and recovery. All of those broader spectrum topics that under which make us more of a robust, resilient nation.
Of course. So Paul, you and Dawn are both responsible for what is called FEMA Region 1. Now that covers all of New England, the 6 New England states. Can you talk a little bit more about how you work with the state and local officials, both before a disaster and after a disaster?
Sure.
I think folks see the after the disaster, that's what hits the news, but I know how much emphasis is actually placed on the front end. So talk about that.
Yeah, I think one of the big things is that we have relationships established with all 6 of the New England states. Primarily our focus is through the state emergency management agencies, but we also do it through the Homeland Security offices as well. A lot of what we do is driven by grant funds that are made available to states to be able to operate an emergency management agency or a Homeland Security agency. We work primarily in peacetime for the most part. I mean, most of the time people, as you said, see us in a post-disaster environment, but most of the time we do all of our work with our states on a regular basis so that if there is an event that occurs, they're better prepared and we're better prepared to respond with them. One of the other pieces that we do on a regular basis is we have what's called a state liaison officer, which is our primary point of contact with each state emergency management agency. And through that state liaison officer, if they activate their emergency operations center, we send that person or people to there to support the operation that they're undertaking, whatever it might be. If it's a terrorist event or if it's a natural man-made disaster or if even if it's an exercise program that they're doing.
Excellent, thank you. So I have to say, last summer, when the city of Springfield, Massachusetts, and the town of Monson were hit by a tornado, I mean, folks in Massachusetts were shocked because when we think tornadoes, we don't think New England, and we certainly don't think Massachusetts. But we all watched and we saw it on TV, and those images are certainly still fresh in my mind. I know that it was your crew, FEMA Region 1, that was actually the first to respond within hours of the devastation.
I heard the train. It sounds exactly like a train. And within a minute, it hit.
We did get in the basement with several huge trees that fell on our property.
It was the scariest thing, and once I finally got to see what was down there a few minutes later, I just cried because I didn't know if anybody was okay. And I could hear my neighbors calling for each other to see if anybody was alive or well, and I did see my neighbor over here, and that was the major casualty of our town. She didn't die of injuries, but she died of the shock of it all.
First few hours were obviously the worst, but then we got a good handle on it. We put a plan in place, and it seems to have worked out well so far.
I saw a Salvation Army truck, and it looked to me like they were providing food, soda, and sandwiches to people that are in desperate need right now.
This is an amazing response. This is an amazing situation here at the church. I mean, they're coming from everywhere. They're just coming to help.
Cake? Coffee cake? My daughter and I are just going from place to place, and we're handing out water and coffee because it's all we can do. We wish we could do more, but the least we can do is give out coffee and water to the workers and also to the people who have lost so much.
We were very, very lucky. We didn't lose our whole home. And as you know, many, many people here, their entire house has been destroyed.
All the agencies seem to be working well. The response from private contractors has been quick.
I never expected the type of response that we got from federal and state and city officials.
We never thought Munson would ever have this happen. Don't ever think that.
Right.
because it did happen.
It's important for people that have a plan when something like this occurs. You never think it's going to happen to you, but it may. And if you're not ready, this is what you're going to see.
Dawn, after a disaster, those impacted, individuals, families, senior citizens, business owners, they have a variety of different needs and they have many questions. What's the best way for them to connect with FEMA and to get information on the assistance and the services that you provide?
Well, FEMA has a very robust website. It's FEMA.gov. And that has a lot of the information that now, as Paul uses the term in peacetime, would be a very beneficial thing for people to go on, get indoctrinated with, understand how FEMA works. It would give the opportunity for people to understand the importance of planning and pre-planning for events and making copies of documents that they might need to know are safe, making plans with their families. There are 800 numbers. There are community response teams that go out as part of the FEMA response that will help at the time of disaster people connect with with FEMA certainly, but with their state and local communities as well. And it's very, very important that we continue to send the message that we all work together as a team. Mm-hmm. So it's not as if FEMA comes in and the state and locals don't do the job that they need to do. Our function is to support their role. And we do that very, very carefully, and it's set in motion at the request of a town requesting assistance from the state, and the state requesting assistance from the federal government, and ultimately, if a disaster is declared by the President of the United States, that enables FEMA with its partners to come in and offer additional support. We're always in a position to support the state and local communities. There are certain levels of things that we can do during and after a disaster in terms of recovery assistance that is really governed by the President. But the position that FEMA takes is that we work on an ongoing basis with our state partners. And the community, the population at large, should understand what they can do to assist as well, because everybody really has a piece of the obligation to really become resilient.
That's a very, very important message. Now, Paul, when there is a disaster declaration, that formal declaration, why is it so important that people register with FEMA?
Well, I think the big thing is that we want to make sure that, that people avail themselves of the services that are available in a post-disaster environment. Lots of times we've had people that have called. I think the application period for a disaster declaration is 60 days from the declaration. You can apply for assistance if there's an individual assistance disaster that's declared. What if you find something on day 62 and you didn't think to register? You may not be eligible for assistance, but if you don't register, then you definitely won't be eligible for assistance, because you can't get anything if you don't apply. It gives a couple of things. It gives us a real flavor of what the damages are as people apply. It gives them an opportunity to have someone come and inspect their property to see if there are damages that they may in fact not see. Mm-hmm. And it also gives an opportunity for, to help people get a leg up. FEMA is not in the business of making people whole in a post-disaster environment, but we are in the business of helping people get that leg up, or even to find the damages that they may not be there. There may be a crack in the basement floor that they didn't even see, that an inspector will come in who's trained to do that, who will in fact see. There's always the number available. There's there's 1-800-FEMA. 1-800-621-FEMA is the number. The information is also available, as Don said, on FEMA.gov. It's available on ready.gov. So in terms of the ease of which people can apply, the mechanisms are there for them to do it. All you got to do is look online. If you don't have access to looking online, then you make that phone call to that 1-800-621-FEMA, and people will walk you through and make it available for you to see what you can do.
So when there is a disaster declaration, does FEMA always set up a disaster recovery center somewhere in the area?
Well, the disaster recovery center would only be set up if there was an individual assistance disaster. In other words, if people's homes were damaged, and there were enough homes that were damaged that was considered to be above the scope of available resources that the state had to support the local communities, then the President may in fact declare an individual assistance disaster. Okay. If there are individual assistance disasters declared, there are always disaster recovery centers that are opened.
Okay.
But the disaster recovery center should not drive you applying. What people should actually do is, in individual assistance disaster, they should be applying for either online or by phone before they go to the disaster recovery center, because there are people there who have computer terminals that can look up their application, can give them advice as to where it's at. There are people there from SBA, so that if you're in a situation where your income threshold is too high, so you wouldn't be eligible for FEMA assistance, you certainly would be eligible for SBA assistance, which is, it's kind of like a system where we're not there, again, as I said, to make you whole, but we're there to assist you in whatever way that we possibly can.
And it sounds like, I mean, Dawn, you talked about sort of your support for states and communities and that intergovernmental partnership and cooperation. And Paul, you've just mentioned another federal agency, the Small Business Administration. So it's almost like you let folks know what all is available. It might not be coming directly from FEMA, but there's a multitude of resources available to folks.
Right, but it's also important, I know that we're talking on a different topic at the moment, but it's important as we talk about these themes that the basic tenets are acknowledged, and that is that in emergency management preparedness, it really starts at the family level. So the family needs a plan, and then if, God forbid, or when a disaster occurs, then neighbors have to help neighbors, and that has to be established as a community. And then above that, it's the town helping the town members, and then the state helping the towns and cities. There's a lot of mutual aid that goes into that. There's a lot of pre-planning and practice and drills that we as FEMA play in because we're part of that system. But it's very, very important, and it's actually crucial to be very careful when we talk about state emergency management agencies or town emergency management agencies or for FEMA itself. We can only do so much. The community has an obligation to become prepared, be better socialized about what the dangers are, how to prepare for them, how to mitigate, how to prevent certain things, what to look for. Those are all pieces that we as Americans need to all participate in. It's a very active process. It's not a passive one.
And it only works when everybody accepts their responsibility at every level. So Dawn, I know that you were in Vermont with FEMA's administrator just days after Tropical Storm Irene hit, causing millions of dollars of damage. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, it was, well, for me personally, my whole career is emergency services and emergency management. I started in New York City as a paramedic and then in the fire department, and I was the state director here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a number of years, and then I took this job. And along the line, I did other things. But I think what is always striking is that the American population is a resilient lot. And immediately, all of those things that I just said to you were in place. People were helping others. One of the things that we find as a challenge is that many times people say, I don't need the help, give it to that person or give it to that person, where in fact they do need the help, they just try and get others helped first. And it's a wonderful thing, and it's nice to see, but it's not necessary. You know, we treat all equally. And what we did as FEMA coming in fact, FEMA had a strong footprint in Vermont, in many of the states in Region 1 during Tropical Storm Irene, because prior disasters were presidentially declared disasters, and we had joint field offices and FEMA personnel in the states. So FEMA really was on site at the time of the disaster, and we started coordinating. In fact, in Vermont, the State Emergency Management Office was impacted directly by the storm, and they moved into the Joint Field Office that had FEMA staff and FEMA equipment in it, and worked out of the FEMA site during the time when they were able to get back on their feet. So it always is humbling when I was on the ground and when I was in the air above Vermont, seeing the incredible devastation, seeing where footprints of bridges being tethered the day before were all but just ripped pieces of steel. Bridges that used to exist and no longer did, railroad tracks that used to be there and didn't, water out of the banks, that you would have to be made of steel to not be touched by that. But I think in the professional community of emergency service and emergency management personnel, you see the greater good. and you really do kick into the professional mentality so that you get the job at hand done. And that's really what the community of local, state, and federal emergency services personnel that we support as FEMA really bear the burden of. You know, we are not the first responders, but we support the first responders in every way that we can in terms of assets and commodities and coordination.
Who would have thought that you would be coming to Vermont because a hurricane hit? First off, hats off to the local officials and also to the National Weather Service issuing the flash flood advisories and talking to folks. There was loss of life, but it could have been much worse if people hadn't heeded those evacuation orders. And what's really different about this, when you got big rivers flooding, we know usually days to weeks in advance. With flash flooding, it is literally how much rain is falling, issuing those advisories, and getting people to safety. And we always talk about disasters are local, but you're not by yourself. The governor and his team, the National Guard here in Vermont, all of the people working to support local officials, but also at the governor's request, the president had declared an emergency declaration. That's the first step in providing assistance. Right now focused on, as the governor says, life safety and life-sustaining missions. We are also beginning to do the damage assessments, determine what other assistance will be required, and we'll be working with the governor and his team as we go literally road by road, washout by washout, to look at the damages and the homes impacted. But our commitment on behalf of the president is to work with the governor's team through this most critical phase. The first 72 hours we know is really the most important time frame to make sure we're stable, and then we'll begin working with the governor and his team on what available assistance may be needed to assist in recovery.
People around the country have been saying the media hyped Irene. What would you say after seeing Vermont?
Well, this was our concern. It was not just the wind and the coastal impacts, but the heavy rain, and unfortunately, you had so much rain here so fast, it just caused a lot of this really extensive damage to the road system. So again, we're working with the governor's team to really focus on life safety and sustainment, but also looking at what it's going to take for recovery.
Just from the air, what does that look like?
Roads have been cut out, bridges washed out. You can tell different homes have had damages. In some cases, you can see the actual damages. In some cases, what you see is people are now starting to get things out of their house, trying to dry stuff out. So if you go flying around the rivers, you got different places where it just took the whole road out, took a bridge out, took out a home, or flooded something.
How would you evaluate the emergency response so far?
But right now, the governor's focus and his team has been on the life safety aspects, getting to the communities and areas that are cut off, make sure they can get supplies in there, and then start looking at what it's going to take to start getting roads back and other things so they can be ready. FEMA's not doing this response. This is local officials, the state, the National Guard. Our job is in support. So when people tend to talk nationally about what FEMA's doing, I always like to remind them, we're not the team, we're part of the team. That first response, neighbor helping neighbor, the state backing up the local officials with their National Guard, then our job is to support the governor and his team.
Well, as you said, throughout our nation's history, whenever a disaster strikes, whether it be of the magnitude of 9/11 or a major weather-related emergency, you see people coming out to help. And FEMA does play an important role in the coordination of that, and it really is inspiring. So thank you for that. Dawn or Paul, talk a little bit about the training exercises that FEMA coordinates, engages in to help communities to prepare.
Well, I think one of the things that people is a little known fact about FEMA is that FEMA actually has the Emergency Management Institute, which is a college campus down in Emmitsburg, Maryland. And we offer on-campus training on emergency management, homeland security. There are, I don't know how many hundreds of independent study courses that people can take. The Emergency Management Institute is co-located with the National Fire Academy, so there's a huge amount of fire training that's available. So I think, at the bottom line is that FEMA is not, we're not first responders, but we are in the business of making assistance available to people to learn anything that they want to learn for the emergency management or homeland security business. The other piece that we have as part of our preparedness program in New England is we have relationships with a lot of the colleges in New England. And if people You know, 10 years ago, you would never hear of anybody having either an emergency management or homeland security undergraduate degree. There's a multitude of colleges across New England and across the country that have both of those things now. The Massachusetts Maritime Academy, which has an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Anna Maria College out in the west part of the state where I live, they have an undergraduate degree in Emergency Management. And again, this is all stuff that's not necessarily driven by FEMA, but we certainly support all those programs.
So the institute that FEMA runs, when local community members, first responders, firefighters, police officers want to attend that, is there a fee for that?
There's a fee that goes along with it, but what usually happens is that if a local firefighter is interested in something, he would fill his application out and pass it up through the state fire marshal, who would in turn send it through the state training officer. And if the individuals are accepted into the program, there's a nominal fee that I believe is just for the food that they eat while they're there. I think all the other expenses are either picked up by the agency, our agency, or by the state sponsoring agency that's sponsoring the individuals to go.
Wow.
Paul spoke a lot about the formal application of training. We also coordinate and participate in, as I've said, in many of the exercises that are run by towns or state entities, or that we in fact ourselves run with other federal agencies, so that at the time of a disaster, we've walked that road before, albeit not with the stressors that come with a real disaster, but having had the opportunity to know that you've thought out the worst case scenario and then practiced and drilled on it is key. It's essential, and it's essential for all of the people that we work with. So, you know, it's the same thing that we encourage the community at large to do just that. Make a plan, practice it, drill on it, so that in the event that something happens, you've already dealt with those things.
So one of the most deadly disasters to hit New England was a hurricane of 1938. Now, there is nothing that we can do to stop hurricanes, but we certainly can be prepared for them. And in preparation for our conversation today, I actually took a look at the educational video that your folks in FEMA Region 1 prepared. Congratulations. Very well done, very effective, and I think it's a message that really does need to be shared.
It has been months since Hurricane Charlie tore into Punta Gorda, but there is still a sense of fear and disbelief.
I've lived in Florida all my life. I've been to a couple Category 2s, but never no Category 4. I'll never live to never stay for another one.
We've seen the damage that they cause in the southeast and in the Gulf Coast. But if we look back in history, we see that we've had significant damage from hurricanes in the past in New England as well.
1938 and 1954 hurricanes were both Category 3 hurricanes at landfall, major hurricanes.
Somebody had sent for a barometer for a gift for their husband, and it arrived that morning, and he opened it, tapped it, and it dropped down and said hurricane, and he said, this damn thing doesn't work.
I didn't know what to expect, so you didn't fear what you didn't know. So we didn't know how grave it was.
Probably our hurricane of record is the 1938 hurricane, which caused significant damage, and today's numbers would be, billions of dollars in damages and cost many lives.
It took less than 24 hours for that storm to move from the Bahamas to New England to make landfall. It was moving at over 60 miles an hour.
The trouble was there were people who did not realize how bad it was. And I know for a fact there was 2 women that went around the Ocean Drive, and they were lost because the tidal wave hit.
I'm going to tell you, it was very scary.
Hurricanes are extremely dangerous. Oftentimes people just associate them with being a coastal phenomenon, large waves or wind, but you also have other problems like inland flooding. You can have tornadoes, you can have flash flooding where there's thunderstorm areas.
And if that times out, as it has in the past with storms like 38 and 54, with high tide or astronomical high tides, the highest tide of the month, as it did in 38, when those elements come together, that's when you get massive devastation, historical devastation.
My father wanted to get out right away that morning, maybe 9:30, and my mother kept saying, oh, Norman, stop being a baby about it, it's not going to hit. It slams, and it slams fast. Because when we first saw it coming out of the road, we almost didn't have time, I'd say within 60 seconds. It was like coming so fast. You'd think you'd have 10 minutes for that, but you just don't. It's like in seconds.
To people who decide not to evacuate, I would say that not only are they putting themselves at risk, but they're putting first responders at risk. Heed the warnings and take them seriously.
It's never an excuse to ignore hurricane warnings. We saw it last year with Hurricane Earl. That storm took a last-minute jog to the right. We were extremely lucky with the way that that played out. And we've seen that play out in years past where these storms do come up, and we are in that cone, that forecast cone, and you need to take preparation for that. There's a whole generation of New Englanders that haven't even experienced a hurricane, period. It's been 20 years since Bob. We battle complacency. Every year when we come on and we talk about the hurricane forecast, or we're talking about tropical storms or hurricanes that are out there, you know, I think we're battling that, oh, ho-hum, we haven't had one in 20 years. We're never going to get one here. We don't have to worry about it. We say it every year, but it's really not a matter of if we are to get into a major storm. It's when it's coming.
The most important thing that you can do to prepare for a hurricane or tropical storm this hurricane season, especially pre-season when you have the time, is to have a plan. You need to have a plan. You can go to ready.gov and find out how you make a plan, how you get an emergency kit of supplies, and I think that's the best way to protect yourself personally from a hurricane. You should remove items from around your house that might blow around and break your windows. You can protect your windows using storm shutters or plywood. You should clean out your gutters and downspouts. Make sure that you have fuel in your car and other supplies on hand, such as water, batteries, and generators. You should review your insurance policy. Homeowners insurance often does not cover flood, so you may want to get a policy through the National Flood Insurance Program. I was actually a local official on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi during Hurricane Katrina, and I saw personally and professionally what that can do to people's lives. That's something that I would not want to see happen here in New England. And I think that the best thing we can do right now is to mitigate those risks, is to be prepared.
I think one of the things that, as you talk about those kind of things, the last hurricane that we had prior to Hurricane Irene this past fall was Hurricane Bob in 1991. People begin to forget about things over a period of time. Hurricane Bob, when it struck Cape Cod in Buzzards Bay, was a Category 1 hurricane. If the scenario was that instead of Hurricane Irene turning into a tropical storm when it made landfall in Connecticut, if it remained a hurricane, the devastation would have been far, far worse than it was. Although it was a terrible storm, and the damages were immeasurable in terms of the citizens, particularly in the state of Vermont. But in Connecticut and Western Massachusetts and in Vermont, it was a bad, bad storm. The fact that the storms hit, it reminds people of what our vulnerabilities are. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that people forget. And one of the things that Don made reference to is the development of a plan. And exercise your own family plan. I mean, if you think about it, I have a wife and 3 children, and that each one of those children has a number to call. If they can't reach me and they can't reach my wife, then what do? I mean, you think about that. You live in New England and you pick up the phone and it works. What happens if it doesn't work? Well, I have somebody that's outside of the region that my family communicates with so that we can all find out where each other are. Those are the kind of things that we really want to impress people to do. The last thing I'll talk about with that is Don talked about, you know, everybody's engagement. One of the things that we work really hard at and are continuing to work hard is the whole community approach. How can everybody in the community get involved to be able to help each other? Because the bottom line is that lots of time, it's the people who live next door to somebody that can lend aid to someone before the first responders get there, before the police or the fire get there, and certainly before the emergency management community gets there. Those are assets that are available next door. And that's the one thing about New England. There are a lot of hardy people in New England that want to take care of themselves. They don't want to rely on other people.
Sure. So now, Dawn, you talked about it, you emphasized it. Paul, you talked about it. We hear it from state emergency management professionals, local emergency management professionals, the importance of getting a family plan. I know I have my 85-year-old mom who's with me. She takes certain medications. I have a dog that I would be concerned about, and I know that people are always concerned about their pets. So we have a plan, and we've not tested it. So that's something I need to do. But But they kind of thought I was, you know, a little bit crazy in my family when I said, you know what, you need to have a plan. Because if I'm not home, who's going to make sure mom's okay, and how do we work that? So for somebody that doesn't have a plan who might be listening, where do they start?
I would suggest that they go to ready.gov. It's a website that's sponsored by the agency, and it's run, and it will walk you through that entire system as to how you develop a plan, how you develop a go kit, because that's the other piece of it that we didn't talk about is if you have to leave your home, and you have to leave your home in a hurry. You made reference to your mother has medication that she needs to take. You really should have a small pill container that you can take with you. Grab it up and go out the door if there's a need to leave immediately. But I think that there's so much information out there on FEMA.gov, on ready.gov. We actually have a Region 1 FEMA.gov/Region 1 website that is all of that information that you could possibly want is there and available.
So Paul, I'm sorry. Can I just want to add just more of a personal note to preparedness. We can all look back, I'm certain, most adults could look back at an incident that in retrospect they wish they could have been better prepared for. We're human. And if you think about disasters, either man-made or natural disasters, for the most part, you don't have a lot of notice, if any notice at all. And I think the human side of the general population doesn't want to think of bad things happening. And the thing that I continue to try and emphasize to people is they need to just think about it for a short period of time. It doesn't take a long time to go on ready.gov, to build a plan, to have resources in your house, and to have a go kit. Once it's done, you can really take a sigh of relief because you've done something incredibly good instead of every time you hear a conversation along this line to say to yourself, I really have to do that. It doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time. And you could pretty much guarantee that at some point you'll need something that's in that kit. Sure. Even if it means you need it at home and it alleviates having to go out of the house at 2 o'clock in the morning because you have something that you've already set for an emergency in your home. And that's, you know, I was in New York City during 9/11. No one expected that to happen. No. We've seen here in Region 1 normal snowstorms that have changed to ice storms and cut populations off from what they expect to have as the deli down the block or the store 2 blocks away that they can walk to. When those things disappear, you have to know that you'll be able to survive in your home for a period of time until help does arrive. And if everyone can just take a step back and just do it because it's the right thing to do, and then know that they've accomplished something good and spread the word that it's not that hard, then I think as a nation we'll be better prepared for that. Just that alone.
Excellent advice. So, Paul, Dawn, whoever would like to answer this, let's talk about flood insurance. Why is it so important that people have flood insurance?
Well, if you have a flood, first of all, there's no guarantee that there'll be a presidentially declared disaster. You have a homeowner's insurance policy. It doesn't cover flood. So if you don't have flood insurance and there is no disaster declaration, then you have no means to be able to recoup for your losses. And flood insurance is one of those things that it depends upon where you live, and sometimes the cost is very, very reasonable if you don't live in a special flood hazard area. Other times the cost may be a little bit higher, but to me, the risk is outweighed by the benefit that you get from having it. A flood insurance policy, if you live in an area that's outside what's called the special flood hazard area, which would be either a coastal area or an area that's close to a river, is relatively reasonably priced. And believe it or not, 20% of all flood insurance claims come from outside of the special flood hazard area. Wow. So it's one of those things that if you don't have the coverage, then there's absolutely, you're stuck with the bill, bottom line. And even if you do have a presidentially declared disaster and you do have flood insurance, as I said before, a disaster declaration for individual assistance is only going to give you a leg up on the damages that you suffered. If you have a flood insurance policy, in all likelihood, up to $250,000 of coverage is going to cover for your structure. And then you have the option for another $100,000 of interior contents coverage. So to me, it just makes perfect sense. Unless you live up on the top of a mountain, it's one of those things that you should really, really consider.
Okay. So whether I was going to ask, how do people find out if they're in a flood zone?
Again, this is another one of those websites. It's floodsmart.gov, which is, if you go onto the front page of floodsmart.gov, in the right-hand column, you type in your street address and the city or town that you live in, and it will identify as to whether you're in a low, moderate, or high-risk flood zone. And then the other piece of it, that's not a guarantee. What I would suggest is that if anybody is interested, which I think everybody should be, call your insurance company. And there's a couple of questions I would ask the insurance company to begin with. One, how much flood insurance do you write? And if they write a substantial amount of flood insurance, then I would ask them the continuous questions: is where am I located? Can you help me, identify a policy? What do you think I need for coverage? If they don't write a lot of flood insurance policy, I would say thank you very much for your time and move on to somebody in an insurance company that writes it, because it is a little bit tricky. But I think that if you have someone that writes a substantial amount of flood insurance, then I think it's somebody who could really help you.
Good. So having a plan, having flood insurance, good advice for anybody. And I think certainly sentiments that anybody that has been involved with a flooding-related disaster would echo.
Water from the Whetstone Brook overflowed and was coming down Flat Street, heading towards the club. And as it got to the Boys and Girls Club, it came under the doors and into the building. And by the time I left the building, there was a decent amount of water in the building and more coming. And I just got out because there was really nothing I could do to stop it from coming in the building.
But the rain just was coming down, and you could watch the waters just coming up by the foot, not by the inch. We opened our emergency operations center in the center part of Shrewsbury. We also opened up the shelter down here closer. There we had 2 shelters open. Once our phone service went out, we had no phone service in our emergency operations center, which doesn't sound like much to other people. You say, well, you have cell phone service. There is no cell phone service in Shrewsbury. Well, the road is closed because major areas of the road have washed out.
The river has backed out of its banks and come over Route 5 and running into the businesses in the area. We have Route 5 shut down. We put the incident command system in place. We utilize that here in town. Of course, this is much bigger than our routine calls and our day-to-day operations, so it has expanded drastically from what we normally do, but has worked just like it's planned to be.
Within an hour and a half, 2 hours, I had 18 inches of water coming through my front yard and under my home. My sister refused to evacuate, which I couldn't convince her, and neither could the fire department.
The brook came out of its banks, flooded these entire areas, washed some of the trailers off.
It was actually quite scary, not knowing what was going to happen next.
Right now we're going around and doing an assessment of the area to see what's safe and what isn't.
Once I made the commitment to stay, I couldn't get out of the park. So if you're asked to go, you better think twice before you say no, because you could get stuck like I did.
When we come to your door and tell you we think we want you to evacuate, believe us.
If they say they want you to evacuate, get out. Your property's not worth your life.
Everybody says it only happens on TV. Well, it's happened here now, and a lot of people have had an eye-opener.
Dawn, FEMA recently formed a partnership with AmeriCorps. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that will help to actually improve the delivery of services to folks after a disaster?
I'm happy to. We're very happy to be able to engage with FEMA Corps, and you know, it's a good opportunity to explain FEMA. There are about 4,000 employees that are full-time employees across the nation for FEMA, and there are then disaster assistance employees and the new FEMA Corps members as well. There are about 8,000, we call them DAEs, disaster assistance employees, and there are about 1,600 FEMA Corps personnel that we're trying to now gather. And if there's any interest in that, it's brand new. We're filming this within weeks of it being really posted as a new concept, and it's geared towards the younger population. That it's a whole scripted thing that they spend a period of time in FEMA Corps, and they get dispatched out to disasters. There are 5 campuses across the country where they stay, and then upon a response, they're engaged. The disaster assistance employees are engaged. The federal partners that FEMA have are engaged, and a 4,000 member agency becomes a very robust machine to be able to support and coordinate the effort that's needed. And that's, you know, that's really part of what FEMA does. It brings federal agencies into a coordinating center, both at the region and then nationally in Washington, where what the regions need, if there are multiple regions engaged in a disaster, get coordinated through headquarters and the agencies at large. And then those disaster assistance employees and the FEMA Corps employees will be dispatched into the communities to be able to give that force multiplier effect.
It really is an incredible model that allows you to take advantage of the full complement of resources that are available to you, without having all of these folks really on the, you know, the FEMA payroll kind of full time. You have what you need when you need it, and you can literally deploy anywhere in the country. Now, Paul, how long have you been with FEMA?
20 years.
There you go.
Yep.
And so if somebody is interested in a career with FEMA, I mean, you mentioned earlier the number of colleges and universities that are actually giving people a degree in this area. If somebody wants to work for FEMA, what advice would you give them?
There's a couple of pieces of advice that I would give. One, if it's something that you're really, really interested in, I would consider the reservist program. Don referred to it as the Disaster Assistance Employee Program. It's an opportunity to not only become exposed to what we do as an agency, but it gives you an opportunity as an individual to see, is this really something that I want to do? In the 20 years that I've been with the agency, I've been deployed all over the country and done a lot of really, really great things. I can remember 3 weeks into my tenure at FEMA, I was deployed to Hurricane Andrew in Louisiana. And when I was leaving, I said to my wife, I don't know when I'll be back. But that's not for everybody, and I think that's the kind of thing that people need to see as an opportunity. The other way in which people could, you know, possibly get, and it's any federal job, is usajobs.gov. I would continue to look there on a regular basis and see if there's, you know, something in the FEMA region that might strike your fancy and might be of interest to you.
So what have I not asked you by way of a question that you think it's important for our audience to know?
No, I think you gave me every opportunity. I mean, for us, what FEMA really does for the nation is it allows us to coordinate a response. But the message that we really send out is that it is a whole of community approach, and that's the consistent message that has to be talked about. And if you talk to any emergency manager, I've now done this at the city level, the state level, and the federal level. The message is always the same. People have to take care of themselves. Neighbors have to help neighbors, and then it rolls up. There are resilient methodologies with which we've built this new profession of emergency management, but it's evolutionary. And I think that we always strive to learn from past disasters and apply those new lessons to what we hope and are prepared for as we meet new obstacles and challenges. But the one thing that is consistently the same is that we have to depend on people in the community, and they need to be trained and they need to be ready. So that, you know, you allowing us, I know we've touched on that a number of times, and the reason is it's very important. So you allowing us to do that is really the message that we hope to get across.
Thank you. The time went quickly.
Yes.
We are just about out of time. I want to thank our guests from FEMA for joining us and for helping us to better understand the important work being done by the Federal Emergency Management Agency both before and after disaster strikes. I hope you learned some things that will help you to be more prepared and to create your own plan to protect you and your loved ones. I thank you for watching, and I hope that you will continue to join us as we feature other federal agencies on your federal government.